Hello there, this is John Franquist, continuing with Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. In my last video, I ended with Abraham Lincoln had named General Ulysses S. Grant as the commanding general of the Union Army. He did so, and they came to the agreement that to beat the South, they would have to destroy the South. Abraham Lincoln sent Ulysses S. Grant to try to get to Richmond, Virginia, which is where Robert E. Lee was. Remember that Richmond, Virginia is where Jefferson Davis, president of the South, of the Confederacy, Richmond, Virginia was the capital. After 7 weeks of savage fighting while General Grant is pushing forward towards the South, they fought and 7,000 died in just one city during those 7 weeks. Many of those thousands died in that city in the first half hour. After 1 week of pushing forward, there were 32,000 dead. Mary Lincoln was horrified. She called General Grant a butcher. General Grant went to Petersburg, trying to catch up to Lee and stop Lee. And going to Petersburg, he was stopped by General Lee. General Lee actually fought back and pushed back at General Grant. General Grant had pushed forward, and in only 6 miles, he lost 6,000 men. Abraham Lincoln knew this is what they would have to do to get the South to surrender, to keep pushing and to keep this savagery going. But Lincoln did say that the sight of all these ambulances and all these wounded and all these dead and the thought of these thousands and thousands of men dying was more than he could bear. And he made a statement at one point saying that he felt that he would never be happy again. Abraham Lincoln was being pressured. The country was horrified. It was just too much. Thousands and thousands. Remember, the whole Vietnam War, I believe the number of dead was 56,000. The Civil War, in the end, there would be 640,000 dead. That's a huge number. The country was horrified and pressuring Lincoln, negotiate peace, come to some kind of agreement, let's stop this. Lincoln said that he would negotiate with President Davis. They could come to peace terms. But there were 2 things that he would not negotiate. One of them was union. The country had to come together as one. The second condition was he would not take the Emancipation Proclamation off the table, meaning the slaves in the South had to become free. What's going on here, though, is with all this pressure and the country is frustrated and angry and horrified, there was an election coming up. In 4 months, there would be an election, and Lincoln was running for re-election, and everything indicated that he would lose and that he would lose badly. Now, of course, he was running for the Republican Party, and who did the Democrats choose to run against Lincoln? This man right here, General McClellan. This was the guy that I mentioned before in my past videos, called Abraham Lincoln a baboon, a superior gorilla, an idiot, and this man was very, very arrogant. Definitely not Abraham Lincoln's friend. He was running for the Democrats. And Lincoln felt that if McClellan were to win the election, he was going to negotiate with the South and remove emancipation, meaning that the slaves would go back into bondage. When this happened, before the election actually occurred, Lincoln spoke to Frederick Douglass. Lincoln felt that he had no chance of winning. But he spoke to Frederick Douglass and said, let's create a plan to have as many slaves from the South escape to the North as possible. Lincoln actually felt that if he lost, emancipation was going to die. That McClellan would become the new president, Emancipation Proclamation would be void, and the slaves in the South would remain slaves. So Frederick Douglass did state around that time that he felt that Lincoln was becoming the real deal. Now he's coming forward. He says, now I'm looking at a moral man. It's no longer about the Union and the elections and so forth, or Lincoln being pragmatic and prudent. He felt that Lincoln, by that point, if not before, but by that point, did have his heart in the right place. Okay, now, what happened though? A little bit before the election actually occurred, General Sherman, Union general, took Atlanta. Tremendous victory. When General Sherman took Atlanta, the Union felt the war is going to end soon. The South is going to surrender. And that if they stayed the course just a little longer, the Union would win. So what happens? Well, Abraham Lincoln got reelected. So Abraham Lincoln gets reelected. Of course, it's all over for McClellan. He's gone. But now Lincoln had another proposition, and he wanted this to happen before the inauguration. He wanted to amend the Constitution. He wanted to have the 14th Amendment. Sorry, an amendment. It would become the 14th Amendment to ban slavery forever throughout the whole Union. Those border states, the South, everywhere. The slavery would be banned. Now, to do this, keep in mind, a lot of the Democrats, which most of them, of course, were Southerners, a lot of the Democrats had lost their re-election to Congress. And they, well, I should say, I'm sorry, the Democrats that were in the Union side, but the party was still there. And a lot of them had lost their re-election to Congress. They were going to be out soon. Well, the Republicans promised them jobs. Hey, we want to put this amendment out there. Sooner or later, the slaves will be free. Let's do it now, and you can get a job. Let me just say that anything that the Republicans could think of, that Lincoln and his people could think of to get that amendment passed, they did. I wouldn't doubt that there were briberies, money exchanged. There were definitely jobs promised. Some could say, well, they did a corrupt thing for the better good. However you look at it, it doesn't really matter. The point being is the 14th Amendment was passed. And once that 14th Amendment was passed, I think it passed by like 3 votes. In the gallery of the Congress, for the first time, there were black people. The amendment was passed, and everyone applauded. And they took the rest of the day off. It was a historic moment in American history. Now keep in mind, for hundreds of years there was slavery throughout the world, actually. Many countries in Europe had already banned slavery, but in the United States there had always been slavery up to that point. When that 14th Amendment passed, it banned slavery forever. Later on, we'll learn that, of course, with the Jim Crow laws and a long struggle that black people had just to earn their civil rights. It was a long, bloody, difficult battle that has not really ended. But one thing we can say is that when the 14th Amendment passed, 3.5 million slaves were freed. And generations afterwards, they were free. It had begun. So it was a new birth of freedom. Of course, the war still had to be won. So the war went on. Abraham Lincoln got inaugurated. And in his inaugural address, the Union was like gloating. They were like, the South is losing now. It's almost like a done deal. They wanted Lincoln to punish the South. So they wanted to see what was Lincoln going to say in his inaugural address. But Lincoln took a different path. Instead of punishment, he was reaching out to the South to rejoin the Union. He was talking about, I guess you could say it was a charitable address, a moral address of getting back together. Bygones be bygones. He talked about how the war came. In his speeches and his discussions in the past, right before the inaugural, Lincoln had made several comments, and he did take a spiritual stance where he would say things where the country had paid the price for all these hundreds of years of slavery, that it was an immorality, and now we had to come through it. And it would end when the war would end. And that both sides prayed to the same God. And yet, the war came anyway. In all of this, he said, now's the time to come together. Well, needless to say, there were a lot of people that did praise his speech. And Abraham Lincoln wanted Frederick Douglass's opinion on this. And Frederick Douglass said, a sacred effort. Thumbs up, basically, is what he said. Okay, but going on, the war was still going on. But on April 9th, 1865, Robert E. Lee finally surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant. The war was over. 640,000 dead, 3.5 million people freed. And Lincoln obviously was very, very happy. He won his re-election, and now he's thinking about Reconstruction. But unfortunately, he wasn't happy for long. Days after the Civil War ended, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. And we're going to talk about that in my next video. In the meantime, send me your comments, subscribe below. This is John Franquist.